before time for the next session.
From Mavenir, sorry. Should I repeat? Sanjay from Mavenir. Who else to come? Professor Inder Gopal? I think he's not here. He's not here? Oh, he could not make it. Okay. So, Rajesh ji, over to you. Rajesh ji, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon. After two terrific sessions in the morning, I have the unenviable task of keeping you all awake. But I don't think that'll be much of a challenge given the panel and the panelists that we have. The topic for discussion is open source and its role along with open ecosystem in accelerating the edge. So we heard a lot about Open RAN, open networking, and open interface. But what does open source have to do with it? And is there relevance to open source in this Open RAN and open networking ecosystem? And how can that perhaps accelerate our objective of open networking adoption globally? So with that, I'll quickly pose a few questions. I think we'll keep this interactive. I may call upon the audience for a few questions as well. I don't think we've had that chance, and that will also ensure that you're awake and listening. So maybe I'll start with Sanjay. You are obviously, Mavenir has been spearheading the Open RAN adoption. We heard from other members from Mavenir earlier. How do you see open source enabling Open RAN going forward? Because obviously fundamentals of Open RAN is the open interface. It's network elements being able to talk to each other with standardized APIs. But do you see open source being another source of innovation and adoption going forward?
Thanks, Rajesh. I think it's a very interesting question, which is actually in line with the agenda of this conference. Fundamentally, we're talking of open source here. The plank of foundation, or rather I would say foundation of Open RAN is open source. I would use that as the precursor to this discussion. Because the moment Open RAN Alliance was conceived, its implementation was designed based on elements of open source, starting from the infrastructure and moving beyond infrastructure to the applications and bringing different cloud technology platforms inside it. Because I would say, if I have to simplify it, open source, Open RAN, cloud technology. These are three ingredients for the success of making Open RAN and open source to work together. So that's the fundamental, and that's how. And I would just add to it further. I think Mavenir is the first company in the world which has made this open source Open RAN Alliance converted into a commercial architecture of Open RAN. Because the commercial architecture, whenever it emanates from open source, open technologies, it's really hard to bring that analogy together. Mm-hmm. And I think Open RAN and Mavenir, we work together, and we do see a commercial architecture today, which was spoken by various panelists since morning. So that's how I would look at it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Abhishek, your thoughts coming from Red Hat. Obviously, you've been in this space for over almost 3 decades now. Red Hat has established itself as an open source based stack for IT workloads previously, but now, of course, you're transitioning to telco workloads. And how is the transition happening, and what are your perspectives on the success story of open source based solutions?
Yeah, I think thanks for that generous introduction of Red Hat, and welcome to the esteemed panelists firstly, and to the audience. From a Red Hat perspective, as you rightly said, right, Red Hat started talking about open source about 3 decades back. Right? At that point in time, it was just a buzzword, right? And as an organization, if you see in the last 30 years how we've evolved, I mean, it's very pleasing to see today that everybody here wants to catch that wave of open source, right? Now, your question about, the discussion about open ecosystem and open source, right? So if you look at the perspective, open source primarily reduces the entry barrier, right, for a lot of organizations. What we've seen is that in India, in the next 5 years or so, there's going to be a large amount of startups that are going to come. Now, these startups need to be enabled on technology. And how does open source play a role? It reduces that entry cost, entry barrier. What we try and do in this is, once they've reached that stage of maturity, right, Red Hat primarily helps to get it at scale. Because if you look at commercial deployments vis-a-vis something in lab, you need something which is resilient, tested, scalable. Enterprises are always looking for life cycle, longevity, features, so on and so forth, right? So Red Hat primarily plays that role of, making it hardened, enterprise grade, productized, available to consume. You also rightly mentioned that, we started our journey with Linux, right? And today, if you look at any geography of the world, any telco operator that is running their network functions, I would say they would have some element of Red Hat running inside it, whether it's in the form of Linux or whether it's in the form of, the latest NFV technology, which has been evolving world over, right? So Red Hat has now evolved from, a Linux to a cloud company. And we're playing that important role as a stitching fabric from a cloud perspective, making sure that all the partners come together, with their open interfaces and provide the choice and flexibility to the customer so that they can go ahead and test various, mixed models and, various product offerings. That's what we, I believe.
Great. Yeah, thanks. So you hit upon an important point about lowering the barrier for entry. And maybe I'll just take that forward from an India perspective. Traditionally, India has not been an early adopter or maybe a driving force for technology and product specifically, right? So, Mr. Upadhyay, do you see this as a transformation and a transition to maybe India leading some of the product development, capabilities because of this community-based, development as well as open networking-based solution in networks?
Good afternoon, everyone, as well as this session. Open RAN is allowing, first of all, the diversification in the supply chain. So, by diversification in the supply chain, the game is open for many of the vendors in India. And especially if you look at the startup ecosystem in India, it is progressing very well. We are producing regularly unicorns. And I'm sure with the lowering of entry barrier, this is going to be a big game changer for India. And with the open source, definitely not many startups have already started working. Like recently we had a indigenous demo in DOT, 13th floor, wherein small startups came together and established a 5G call using open source. It was not feasible earlier when the complete chain is regulated and controlled by one entity, and there are very few entities currently in the world. We being in CDOT, we are going to play a role of integrator. We are not going to develop ourselves. We are going to play a role of integrator. We are going to support all these startups because we all know a lot of IP of big companies, even Nokia's, Ericsson's, are done in India. Bangalore, Delhi, Gurgaon, Pune, these kind of cities. and that IP gets integrated and comes back to India as a product at a high cost. The second is the Open RAN and open interface have also allowed in terms of investment. If you look at the Huawei's R&D budget, it is $18 billion. I think we can't think of. Maybe Nokia's maybe $7-8 billion. We are talking about here, our startups tell us, if you give me 50 crore, I will give you a RAN. That kind of, so I am sure that this particular open interface and open source and the opening of the different value components of that chain is going to play a big role in promoting Indian startups, and very soon, I am confidently saying this, India will have its own 5G core, India will have its own 5G RAN. Thank you.
Great. So maybe just leading from there, just to Professor Sirhoi there, maybe if you can touch upon what is being done from a standards perspective, what are some of the initiatives that are being taken in India from TSDSI and otherwise, maybe if you can shed some light on that. Yeah.
Right, good afternoon. Thanks Rajesh for putting up this question to me. So for me, the open source is actually collaboration, right? So we're talking about the ecosystem of ORAN in general and telecom in general and ORAN is specific. And we are also talking about increased role of Indian community as a supplier or as a developer, right? So now what TSDSI, which is an Indian standards body for telecom standards, right? So about a year ago, they understood that open source is going to play a key role in the next generation networks, particularly ORAN part of it. And so a task group was established within the membership of TSDSI. And the mandate of this task group was to study what is the state of the open source forums worldwide in this field and to assess whether adopting these open source deliveries can someone plan a commercial grade product, how much it will take in terms of efforts and strategy. And in this case, would this initiative, if it can be done in some better way, more organized way, will it help Indian startups to come up as a product company, which is in a hardware space is almost missing, because the number of telecom equipment designed and manufactured by Indian company compared to what we need is almost zero, it's negligible, right? And so with this goal, this task force was established. Task force came up with the recommendation that it is a right time for India to take some very concrete action, and so the government should invest in a major program, and this major program, it could be called as India Open Source Program for 5G in general, and this program should convert these open source initiatives into a delivery which is production worthy. So it is true to large extent, and many people understand it, that open source is a very good way of contributions, inviting contributions and from individuals and organizations, and things go very fast. But when it goes to adopt it for a deployment, it is not so easy. A lot of effort is needed. And if you really want to baseline a product which need to be supported in career or other enterprises, right, it needs some support. And for any startup to develop competence of enhancing even an open source code, make it production worthy, it's a huge effort and no Indian company can do that job. So this was an idea, can something as a centralized be done? And so that this centralized entity provide entire 5G software in a very similar way as Red Hat provides an operating system. Right? So if this can be done, this will be an enabler for many of the Indian companies to become OEMs in this field. So this was an idea. This project went ahead, and it is at some level of government approvals and starting on this activity. IIT Delhi and Institute of Science has taken a lead along with many industrial collaborators in this. CDOT is going to play a key role because they have already approved the idea of they would be the first user of that 5G open source delivery, software delivery, which will come from this committee, and then many more will start aligning with. So this is one smart. If you ask me to go more in detail, maybe I'll
Sure, I'll come back to you. So just Professor Joy, I mean, it may. I'm just going to do a shameless plug for STL because we have actually built. Designed, manufactured, and developed software and hardware products, that are open networking based out of India. So that success story is already happening. It's not in the future. So, just taking on from that standpoint, where open source is a community-driven, is there a need for perhaps specification or standardization, because otherwise you could have a lot of other challenges. Maybe Gil, from your perspective, your experience from Wind River, developing platforms that are now driving edge solutions, perhaps.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So first, we hear a lot open source and open standards, open API, and usually put them together, and I would like to challenge this a bit. So first of all, Wind River, our complete solution is open source, developed in the upstream first methodology under the Open Infrastructure Foundation project called Sterling X. And open source has a key role for fast innovation, for lowering the barrier of entry. We heard it, I think we all agree with it. But if you look from an operator perspective, and I heard it from many operators, most of the operator operates a network. They're not developing the network, okay? They really don't, going to go into the DU or the CU or the platform and start to make changes to the code or even want to know this, okay? What they care is that they can mix and match. They can disaggregate, so they can get a DU from one vendor and a CU from another and an RU from another vendor and a platform from a different vendor, okay? And those things will work, and they will work reliably out of the box. The way to get there, it's open standard and interfaces. So interfaces that are well-defined, okay, agreed by all the parties in the ecosystem, and everyone implement those interfaces. Interfaces in the form of API, in the form of all kinds of protocols, those type of things. Okay, this is really what will drive ORAN for success. Okay, whether the specific component it's using open source or not, it's more a company strategy. If you're a small startup, for example, you need a low barrier for entry, you're very likely to go only to open source. If you're a much bigger company, you may have a mix, okay? You may have only proprietary, you may have only open source, but it's purely a business strategy at this point, okay? But just like I said, it's very important to separate those two things. For ORAN to be successful, you need to have open standards and open interfaces, okay? And you need to have all the parties involved in it actually implementing.
Okay. And do you agree that perhaps, Gil, from the evolution perspective, you've seen some success stories, right? ONF has been pushing open source. ORAN has done it more recently. And then you have Sonic for cloud infrastructure. Do you see that as being maybe a starting point, but maybe you need a lot of curation and hardening and a more product-centric view? Even though there is a community behind it, someone has to take it together and put it together as something that's useful to an operator or a consumer. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I participate in standards. Actually, ORAN, since the day it was created. If you look at workgroup 6, cloudification and orchestration, you can see personally my name in many of the contributions. And the things that happens, it's, you have your incumbent, so if you look at the ecosystem, your incumbent, players. And some of them may have different agenda, maybe not as much interested to push all the way to an open. So, the standards takes longer, okay? There is these techniques and tactics of delaying stuff, okay? Where open source comes into it. So for example, if you look at Orange specifically, there is the Orange software community, okay? And over there is an open source implementation of basically the standard, specifically the INF project, the infrastructure, it's based on Sterling X, okay? And this really creates, call it like this, it's a trigger to basically show here's the implementation of the standard in an open way, okay? And by this, basically lowering the barrier for entry for others and basically pulling. So it's a cycle, okay? I would say really what really pushes things to maturity, it's actually service providers and ecosystem coming together, and I would say taking the risks and doing it. Verizon did it with the first O-RAN deployment. And I can tell you, it was, when everyone looked at it, no one believed that it would be possible, okay? And we did a lot of stuff with Verizon, put it back into the standards, things get matured, but it's basically, if you're going to wait for the O-RAN standards to mature, you're not going to deploy O-RAN in 5G days. I can tell you this for sure, okay? It's about basically, pushing forward and saying, okay, we're going to take the O-RAN spirit, if you want to call it, we're going to do this, we're going to use open source for the fast innovation, okay? And then feed it back into the standardization.
Okay, great. Yeah, go ahead.
I think the fundamental thing is, we have come out of the standards, it's a life cycle. We move to the lab, and then we go to we have a first proof point which gets to the market, and that's what we talk about, the commercial grade O-RAN, wherein all these elements are used. But what fundamentally is also important that does it scale? Does it scale, and does it make a right business case for the operator? To your point, and then see the ease of use and then further development. But fundamentally, right from the design and specification, the collaboration which Mr. Sirohi just mentioned is very, very critical, because they have to move on from next.
Yeah.
For example, O-RAN Open Net completely, like any hardware can be used. Yeah? Lots of hardware can be used for implementation of a DU or a CU, but at the end of the day, there has to be more. There cannot be just an HP and a Dell. But if it's so open, then many should come in. That will bring economies of scale, and that will build the price points, which will scale.
Sure. Maybe, since you have the mic, one of the fundamental challenges or something, themes that were spoken about was, as you bring different elements, different partners, then someone has to bring it all together, and more importantly, these network elements have to now interoperate. So even though the specs, the interfaces may be standardized, specific implementation may have variations. Maybe, if you can just allude to some of your experience with interoperability and how Mavenir is looking to overcome some of that.
As I said, in the beginning, it's a life cycle from point A to point B. The moment it gets into the lab, the proof points become important from interoperability. Yeah. Now, interoperability is one challenge, which obviously everyone has business interests, right from the user to the supplier, the vendor, etc. But there are other dimensions which also come into play, because we can say open, that means how open? Then the issue of security comes into play.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the aspects which become very, very fundamental, which are questionable, which has to be addressed. Because the success of commercial grade system, again, when we had GSM coming into the market, not that GSM was as GSM as we saw 10 years later. So it will have its own life cycle. But I'm sure everyone is looking at these aspects. And of course, for example, in O-RAN implementation, what Mavenir looks at, we have a zero trust security, which is like we check the packets every time, not that just a person gets through once, but that check is continuous. Yeah. So I think those all aspects would have to be looked at, because you can't have all the things. You can have a CPU and a memory in a box, but there's always a price cost advantage. How much of CPU and memory is being used? Yeah. That is something which will be very, very fundamental.
And it's more of a journey rather than
it is. Okay.
Okay.
But we are happy that at least there is a commercial proof point available. It's only a question of scale, and while we are scaling, the other problems get resolved.
Sure. Okay. You touched upon security. Maybe I'd like to hear the panelists' view. Abhishek, you want to maybe give it a shot? One of the thought processes around openness is that, or at least the sentiments in the industry is that as you open the interfaces, well, you're leading to more insecure networks. But I'd like to hear the perspectives here and see how we can plug that, perception.
Yeah, I think, one of the myths around open source is security, right? Fundamentally, whatever is open, which means it's more exposed. I'd like to give a counter view to that, right? Imagine something which is more closed and proprietary, developed by, say 5,000, 10,000 people, vis-a-vis a source code which is available to access for millions and millions of people, right? So that means there is, tens of millions of pairs of eyes which are looking at the same source code, trying to make it better, innovate better, right? And if you see an issue, how quickly can that be resolved, right? So you look at from the perspective of the number of people who are simultaneously working on a project, right? From a Red Hat standpoint, if you ask me, right, Red Hat's ethos is open source. So what we primarily do is we take projects out of the community, right? We make sure, and as you know, there are like millions of projects, right? So, for example, within the Linux world itself, there are millions of Linux projects, right? But Red Hat kind of pulls out a project, a sub-project like a Fedora, right? That's the base for Red Hat, right? That's the open source version of Red Hat. We kind of work on the validation life cycle, the security aspects. We also make sure that a wide array of ecosystem partners validate, right? So be it hardware vendors, be it software vendors, right? We make sure that that validation and certification happens so that the life cycle and security aspects are addressed before this product becomes commercialized. I mean, one of the consumers of the Red Hat Linux is CDOT, right? The lawful intercept application, which is a very, very important application within the telecom sector, uses Red Hat Linux as the underlying operating system, right? So, yeah. I mean, I could say that it's more so a myth, I think, but if you also look at the number of deployments that we have within the telecom networks now, NFV or 4G virtualization is nothing but ITification of the network, right? So we are disaggregating at various layers. We want to make sure that the customer has the option to choose what he wants. He can decide what hardware, he can decide what application, right? And this, by virtue of open source and by virtue of the program that Red Hat runs with a wide array of partners, including guys like Mavinia, we make sure that we stitch it together and go to the customer, right? And make sure that they have this as a completely open source package.
If you look at this disaggregation, and not just of the hardware and software, but also disaggregation in terms of partner ecosystem, could there be a situation where no one knows who owns that security, flaw? I mean, it's inevitable. Somebody's going to hack into something, right? So, yeah, who takes a responsibility there, and who owns that?
There are a lot of people who would like to jump to answer, but from what I've seen working with the customer, right, there is an approach. So, open source is more so an approach and a strategy, as Gil mentioned, right? When you take this strategy, there are going to be several elements running in parallel. Now, how do you decide who owns this, right? If you disaggregate and you say that everybody owns your own piece, it's never going to work, right? But you still have to be the custodian of your own architecture, right? 5G presents great opportunities for operators to move away from the traditional mindset of buying everything in a box and forgetting about it. 5G is going to be more innovative. It needs, faster pace of innovation. So, it's various models that will come into play. One of the models is, we've seen with the guys like Verizon. They've become their own system integrator, right? So they own everything. They have a massive army, or say for Reliance Jio for that matter, is on the similar lines, right? But there are other operators, say in India and across Asia Pacific, who probably rely on a system integrator who makes sure that everything sticks together and they maintain the life cycle, harmony within the various partners. So you'll need something like that to move forward, right? It can't be each man to its own.
Sure. Great.
So yeah, I agree with Abhishek on many things. So for example, I remember during the transition from proprietary to open source, people used to say the same thing. It's like security risk, all those type of things. And if it's open, it's actually, you have more people that think it. You can see, if it's closed, you can actually hide security issues and no one will know about it. Okay, so this is one thing to think about it. So it's just, I will say, coming back to before, it's in the standards, let's say like this, there's maybe some bodies, okay, that participate that would not like to see disaggregation happening, which create a lot of noise in the system because, oh, it's not secured. It's actually very secure for a couple of reasons. First of all, you can see what's happening, okay? Secondly, it's really the interfaces, and there is a well-defined, there is actually a work group in ORAN that focuses specifically on security. It's really not a rocket science. So, in a platform perspective, for example, you secure boot, you sign the containers that runs, all those type of things. So, no one can go and switch the hard drive, for example, and put another hard drive, in an edge site, and it will boot and, stuff like this, okay? Or running a container that is not authorized. So there is at this level of the platform. The DU, CU, like you heard, they check packets, all those type of things. But also there is simple security connectivity on the interface, whether it's IPsec or other types of standards, okay? So it's just, I would say, noise. It's not less secure. If anything, it's even more secure because more people can see what's happening and can flag out if there is an issue.
Great. I hope that's comforting to everybody in the audience and whoever is dialed in. Yeah, please.
I want to add something on this. We are actually talking about 2-3 different things. One is open interfaces, open source, and possibly in ORAN we have more open interfaces, so it has more risk of security, right? So number one, open interfaces is not new. Open interfaces and standardized open interfaces is the beginning of mobile technology from the second generation, right? So whether that open interface is interoperable also, yes, we had both. So if you take a GSM, so interface between radio network and core network was interoperable, although there was an open interface between base station controller and base station that was never interoperable, right? So we had come from that time. 3G had the same thing. IUB was never interoperable, right? And later in the 4th generation, we integrated base station controller and the base station. They were not two different things. So single eNode became, right? So single element became the radio network. Now we are proceeding further, possibly going back, that now no radio network is not one network element, it is possibly 2 or 3 network elements. 3GPP first believe it is 2 network elements.
Yeah.
Now ORAN as a consortium of maybe more evolved people, they thought no, it's not 2, it is 3. It is CU, DU and the RU, right? So if more interfaces are open, it does not mean extra risk. So let us believe that a lot of people are talking about more open interfaces and more security risk. There are some security implications, like here, since your RIC is going outside, right, and you are now bound to make some network function exposures. This network function exposure, what you expose and what you should not, this is an important and critical thing. And although a lot of people are working on the security aspects of this, I'm sure unless you put these new interfaces into the practice, you will really not know which one of the network exposure functions are really a security risk. So these kind of standardization and the security holes need to be filled in when we go into the implementation. So till that time, many of the things are theoretical and many of the advanced preparation are anyway being done.
Sure. Okay, great. Interesting perspectives. Yeah, go ahead.
That's the nature of any new innovation which comes into the market. I mean, no innovation has gone straight to the smoothness. I mean, it goes through stages, and people are working on it to make it right. And the other point which I want to actually add on, you said that this whole ORAN implementation has so many partners, so many systems. I think there is we could see in businesses, there's a new business which will come out in the market, and from that perspective, you will have very specialized system integration companies, not the erstwhile SI companies who just know the IT. No. It'll be very specialized telecom, who understand telecom side of it, IT side of it, cloud side of it, a mesh of that. And that's something which would require a lot of initiative from the institutions wherein skill development will have to take place. Unless there is skill development taking place, I don't think this is going to become a mass scale.
Okay, great, interesting perspectives. Dr. Upadhyay, yeah.
I would just like to add, see, our experience had been that a lot of startups were working with open source and, spending a lot of time individually. So what we decided, just to add on to what Mr. Sirohi was talking about, open source is available in OAI, ONF, ORAN, and multiple places. So what we decided that ourselves, CDOT, IIT Delhi, and Indian Institute of Science will take all these codes and make a super open source, which will be available to the rest of the startup community in India. So the effort goes down. The second question was raised of scalable and integration issues. Yes, there are huge challenges. From the capability side, I would like to, inform the august audience here. We were given the task by Honorable Prime Minister to produce 4G and 5G for the country. And within less than 2 years, we have produced 4G for the country. We have received the commercial order from BSNL. And it went through all these security checks, those checks, this check and that check. It took our trials with BSNL started somewhere in July 2021 and it is completed very recently in March. So yes, there will be challenges. The purpose of our signing an agreement with IISc Bangalore, IIT Delhi is so that everybody can focus on rest of the things. These things will take care. Any issues coming there about the scalability, about the integration, we will take care. So therefore, I don't buy to the argument that the security will be an issue because as was pointed out, once the code is open to everybody, it becomes much more secure. Look at the NIST, whenever they come up with any algorithm, security algorithm, they put out the code outside so that anybody, the whole community can point out that there is this vulnerability and that gets plugged. So as far as CDOT is concerned, since we work in security, we work in optical fiber, we work in Wi-Fi, we work in all the various domains, we will be able to support the startup ecosystem of the country and will take the lead in solving the problems of security, scalability and integration. We will work as a system integrator and I don't know, before next question is asked, I would like to inform the audience that in our portal, we have already put call for proposal for IoT as well as call for proposal for RAN. We have invited the industry to please come and, tell what you could do. We will integrate, we'll fund the industry and to see that these systems using open source, using our own libraries are produced in India for India. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, I think, in fact, you answered the question I was going to ask you, which is how is CDOT playing an integral role in enabling startups? Because one of the fundamental challenges startups have is capital, and and how is CDOT working? So you kind of answered that question.
I can give one example.
Yeah.
Look at the traditional market, which was Nokia, Ericsson, Huawei, ZTE, and to some extent Samsung. There is no sixth player, maybe Mamanir now. So, in the traditional system, a small guy like a small startup in the country had no say, no value at all. Look at what recently we signed an agreement with VVDN and a very small startup in Hyderabad, Vysig, and ourselves. And believe me, 6 months our radio will be out. In 6 months this radio will be out. In the previous era, you can never think of such thing happening. A YCK is a small company with 40 people, but what we realize, the intellectual power of India is great. You know, that is great. And this openness allows these small players to come together. You need a big brother in terms of government. So we, as part of the government, are playing that role of big brother. We'll take these small things, integrate this, and take it out. Otherwise, in the previous system, I don't think any startup would have been, it would have been possible for any startup to claim today that I'm making CODU. For example, YSIC for us is doing CODU. We are doing the accelerator card. VVDN is doing the RU. Somebody is doing RIC for me. Integration is done by us. And what used to happen earlier, even in the 4G example, Tejas has the radio, but it won't be able to test it with the core. Who will supply the core? Nobody will give. No traditional player will allow you to test because that can, hurt its own market. So therefore, the Tejas, when it came to our core, we tested, we learned from them, they learned from us, and this is how the commercial grade product has passed BSNL 8-month test. And now the time has come for India because of two reasons. Number one, till 4G, we had a very traditional hardware. Very traditional hardware. When I went to BSNL Chandigarh, I saw Jetty 4G occupying whole room. Our whole 4G sits in one rack. It's totally virtualized, totally works on a Dell, HP, IBM, you give any kind of server. So one is that the hardware independence. So your cycle time of development gets reduced drastically. Rest is complete software, and India is a software power. So as more softwareization is happening, I think time has come from India that we will produce for India and for rest of the world.
Professor Sirori, did you have any comments about how is academia, and TSDSI, of course, is making a lot of effort bringing use cases and India-centric standards implementation. But from your perspective, you had a practice within the purview of IIT Delhi that is about industry and academia collaboration. And how is that enabling, innovation?
Yeah, I'll certainly take up this, but I was excited to add some more point to
Sure.
Dr. Upadhyay's view, because he says that there's a scope of huge innovation and the collaborative working and will actually make success. I just wanted to share, because I'm in the industry for the last 34 years as a developer, as a product developer in India. That's the important thing. And the kind of experiences we have, the success experiences, I want to share just one or two. Right? CDOT was the first Indian organization we came out with the core network of GSM many years, 25 years ago. Right? And when it went to the field, right, it was a successful field trials. More than 50,000 commercial subscribers were running on those mobile switching centers, which were designed by CDOT boys. Right? It means something. If people understand what does it mean, 50,000 commercial subscribers running on that product, giving the service, it was something. We couldn't, in this process, we could found bugs in the standard products like Ericsson's radio network. Our CDOT engineers found bugs in them, and they were high-headed that this is our standard product working worldwide, how can it have bugs? But we actually proved that there are bugs in them. Next experience, when first Indian radio network system was designed, right? This system went for interoperability test in one of the prominent operators in Paris. This interoperability test was concluded in few hours, which was not the case those days, right? It used to take months, many months to complete the interoperability test, right? So it was concluded in few hours, and the head of that organization had to come down to see what was great in this Indian product where the interoperability was done. So the fact is that whatever product Indian guys have done, they have done very thoroughly. They had an extra challenge that this is a new product and many people will not accept that it is complete. So this power exists.
Sure.
Now, since Open RAN is actually going to give a much extra opportunity for us because things have been divided into smaller pieces. And these smaller pieces, it is easier for us to create something worthwhile, not just of the same quality as it exists worldwide, but many of the things we can be ahead of what is available worldwide. So this is the theme today, that we want to go ahead in certain areas. And since the open source has become a reality, we are not restricted that we don't have the knowledge of everything. So we have the complete knowledge, we have focus, and academia which is ahead in the research. So Indian academics, professionals as researchers, they are known worldwide in certain areas. Unfortunately, that research is not translating into products, and which has become a new focus. So we are now focusing, that's why I am called a professor of practice, that how this research which was remained in the publications, how we can increase our product portfolio, right? And so that it can be suitably translated ahead of time, so that at least if not telecom service provider, because 5G is not only for the first service providers. 5G is for the entire industry, including the strategic segment. Right? So we as researchers and we as implementers, with the industry and academia coming together, we can really develop and are developing solutions of national importance, and we will not wait for somebody else to come and solve our problems. So this is the focus, and this drive is actually driving many of us.
Sure. So from a distant follower to a fast follower to a leader in the industry, really accelerating the edge. So that's great. I promise that I will have some time for audience questions. So maybe this is a good time for folks in the audience who have been very patient all day so far. So any questions for the panelists on this topic or any topic for that matter? I think these gentlemen can answer any question here.
As an integrator has a major role because it gives the confidence to the market access as well as the user. So how the CDOT can want to take as integrator as the lead the product?
I will give you one example. As part of the testbed project, what DOT funded to 8 academic institutions in the country, it has produced a core, it has produced a RAN. Yes, we may say that it may not be totally deployable tomorrow. I can give example. L1 stack was written by IIT Madras. L2, L3 stack was written by one of the startup. The accelerator cards were done by IIT Kanpur. It was all integrated. And now we are working on that to take the integrator role to ensure that the 500 tests, what the carrier asks, because it is not purely a demonstration of a call. When you go to a carrier network, it tells you if it is a greenfield operation, absolutely no problem. But even in India, greenfield operator also will need this requirement. You have produced a 5G system. The requirement of country is when the 5G guy moves to 4G, he should get 4G. He moves to 3G, he should get 3G. He moves to 2G, he should get 2G. All these handovers need to be done, which are not done normally in the lab. These are the enhancements which need to be done. Data handover, call handover, throughput, at the edge what throughput is getting. So all this integrator role we are doing, and using this platform, I want to tell the industry, you have something even at TRL 3, we will fund you to come to TRL 9. Government of India, Prime Minister's vision is very clear. We have to be Atmanirbhar Bharat. I am telling you openly from this platform, any of the startups, any of the companies, firms working in this area, if you are at TRL 3, we are going to support you. The second thing I would like to say, 5G is not only connectivity. The 5G, if you look at the 5G requirement, why is this traditional RAN cannot handle? Reason is the QoS requirements are very different. For a vehicle, autonomous vehicle, you may need high-speed communication with ultra reliability. For IoT, you need low throughput, high coverage, battery efficient. Some robotic surgery, you may need low latency, real-time processing. So all these requirements cannot be done by the traditional architecture. Therefore, lot of innovation is going to come. We are working with various ministries, mining, water, electricity, that how this 5G, which is, the connectivity is now like given. It is see, all these days, the telecom networks are meant for giving connectivity. Initially, it was voice, for example, prior to Jio, I can give example. The voice revenue was 83%. The data revenue was hardly 16-17%. Now today it is just reverse. Voice nobody talks about, people talk about data. So therefore, we have lot many opportunities to create innovation in different use cases to solve the problems which Indians are very capable of bringing out. Now once this connectivity layer is given, platform is given. For example, today I am saying all our radio providers, I can give example, Galore, Rajones, Lekha, Sukta, Sankhya, Signaltron, all these are working with us. They have some product somewhere. But to take it to the next level, you need an integrator role, which we are taking up. We are going to, take these guys, we are going to fund these guys, see that they come up to TRL9, they work with the core, we will give them access to our core, we will make it field deployable. So integrator role, as you said, we are going to take it up.
Any other questions?
Indian version of Linux, that is BOS, by CDAC, we have experienced this continuity problem. That's why I put the words. A BOS operating system, you may BOS. It was some yes, sir. The Linux Indian flavor of Linux is called BOS operating system, which is developed by the CDAC. Later, it was not able to lead the as I mentioned the integrator role, means lead role. We could not transit in the commercialization.
So I don't know what happened earlier. I have no. But now the focus of the government is very clear.
Yes, sir.
That is
the
this country. This nation is called talented nation. What is the use of this talent if we can't produce our own products and continue to import? Look at our import deficit, trade deficit, $60 billion.
Yes.
Along in the electronic segment. $60 billion is a trade deficit. Actually, we should be exporting. With the government's initiatives, some advantage we have achieved in the mobile sector. For example, quarterly we are, exporting approximately 7,000 crore of export in mobile, and our import is hardly 600, 700 crore. Why? Because of these certain policies which the government took, this sector has taken up. So today, right from Apple to all the phones are actually produced in India and exported, and that is how the government has taken decisions, policies. For example, I just name it. Government has given a PLI, productivity linked incentive, where we are saying that we will give you 5 to 6% of your sales. Government has come up with another policy, DLI, design linked incentive, where we are saying if you use Indian design, I'll give you 1% more. So you can get 7% back as a revenue. 12,195 crore is government is giving in PLI. MITI has announced 76,000 crore scheme for semiconductors. That if you are working in a chip kind of work, government is going to support. So this was not earlier. Earlier it was this, earlier we were happy importing and, plug and play system. But now the geopolitical changes, security threats, you will look at General Bipin Rawat, is no more. He told 3 years back, these wars will be not with weapons. The wars will be through cyber warfare. I was yesterday in one of the conference of Geospatial, where the brigadier was talking about how a particular individual was shot down while correctly through AI, while his wife and his daughter were, they didn't get even a little bit hurt. So, because of these political and security issues, how many times the security problems have been noticed in many of the countries. So therefore, if you have to ensure your networks, because telecom is not telecom network alone, it feeds your power sector, it feeds your medical sector, it feeds your financial sector. If this goes, something happens to this, the whole thing will come down. The Russian-Ukraine war has taught this, accentuated this particular debate. Therefore, from the security perspective also, it is the need of the hour for our country to develop our own system, to be, those are security resilient. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Any-
Rajesh, if I can,
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
map to this question of Bharat operating system, what
Yeah.
gentleman is asking, boss, to the current topic. After this. So boss was, Bharat operating system was a very important initiative, very relevant, but 15 years ago. So there, that time the national needs were different.
Yeah.
Today, needs are different. Now, if you look at some of the information which is being fed from the morning, that the greatest factor of ORAN adoption is that operators' ability to launch new features. This is the most prominent factor. Second prominent factor is operators should avoid vendor locking. This is the second prominent. This is how I understood in today's.
Yeah.
So how this open source initiative within this ORAN, right, how it is going to help, I have some view on this. Right. So when through the open source initiatives, we have more and more people knowledgeable on the entire systems of us, then I'm sure the operators are actually not here who can take advantage of this. So it is a collaborative exercise. Collaborative exercise, as you have more number of skilled people to do that job. Operators is actually responsible for managing everything through the system integrators. But most important is that if the problems are understood, are there people who are doing an advanced research so that this problem gets resolved completely, not just a patchwork.
Sure.
So the advanced research must be done on those systems.
Yeah.
So I remember 20 years ago in a network management function for mobile network, one of the major operator of China, he had 100 PhDs working on that function itself. Right? That kind of working model we do not have in the country. Right? So when ORAN comes, I'm sure some hundreds of our researchers would be working along with the problems of Airtel, Jio and these prominent operators, and we will be making them enable to go next stage and further. Right? So this is a relevant part of this. And in the vendor logging, as we were discussing, that we will have more components coming from the indigenous options, and our system integrators will make sure that even if there are few gaps in it, with their inputs, those gaps will be filled nicely in time, right? And they will get adopted. Since this system integrator was not favorable earlier, if a product was 1% deficient, those Indian products were not getting accepted in the service provider space at all. So this is going to bring a major change, major shift, and it will boost the product development companies' entire ecosystem in the country.
Great, fantastic. On that note, I'll just let maybe the folks who want to give some closing comments, and I'm sure they'll be available offline as well to answer any questions. Any closing comments from any of the panelists on the?
One of the key things which is very, very fundamental, I mean, all this has to tie up to numbers and business. And if we go to scale, it's very critical that we are able to bring quality into this, what we deliver to the market. It's interesting to understand that we'll have specifications, we'll have bodies, we'll have alliances, we'll put together everything, we'll make it work. But finally, does it really scale up to a business? That's very critical. And finally, what we're giving to in the market, does it give quality? Because open source, as I said in the beginning, open source, how open? Yeah, because it's not that somebody will say, okay, I have open source, I will build a large network, then I have not to pay anything, because their open source has various versions. My friend from Red Hat, Abhishek, can talk about it more, because you have to draw a ring fence around the open as well, so that it's maintainable, it's repeatable, it gives enough carrier-grade quality. Now, we do understand from a context perspective also, Mr. Upadhyay, Mr. Sirohi just mentioned about how we're breaking the earlier concepts where we had to depend on the West. But when we are doing that, we have to also understand the game quality. Now we as us, as when we are growing in the industry, we have to come scale up to that quality. So that will be a good challenge to go after. Thank you.
Great.
I think just in closing, two things that I'd like to call upon, and I think great things discussed by Mr. Upadhyay and Sirohi. See, one of the things that we as a country also need to focus on is in the skill base, right? While we are constantly talking about we've got a rich skill base available, we need to nurture that, right? So while we are all talking about open source is more about contribution than collaboration also, right? And contribution will come in if you have that skill base, like you just mentioned, right? You've been developing, right? So that's one of the elements that we need to work upon as a country. The second thing, I think, while we've all discussed Open RAN all this while, we also need to think that whatever as an architectural strategy that any operator is taking for now is not just for Open RAN, right? Open RAN is one of the use cases of the edge.
Yeah.
And why we're talking about ecosystem is what, Upadhyay sir is also talking about. He's making, reducing the barriers of entry, because the barriers of entry for startup are money, time, resources, skills, right? So all this is available to them, right? But when you go large scale, when you go large enterprise-wide, you need resilience, you need security, you need so many factors, right? So that's when you choose an approach which is very unified platform-led, so that you can have heterogeneous applications running over the edge, including ORAN, right?
Sure.
And take that approach and choose the right partners and harness the power of open source.
Great. Thanks. Go ahead, Gil.
Yeah, I would like, from my side to say something. We talked about a lot open source, open interface. There is one big open that's important for ORAN to be successful, and it's an open mindset. Okay, it's basically the willingness to go and say, okay, there is a new company, a smaller company, I'm going to allow them to come to the network and give them a portion, take some risk if you want to take it. Calculated risk, but not tied in this mindset, oh, I'm only going to work with the big guys that are known for a long time. And for example, the vertically integrated solution. I still hearing a lot of operators, we're speaking about ORAN, it's all great, and then they say, I want everything from one vendor because what if something will happen, okay? So this is the open mindset that you need to change. If you don't change this, it will not happen. I can tell you, I work on virtual RAN, open RAN, whatever the term of the day that you want to put with, since 2012 with China Mobile. If you Google, you'll see China Mobile started first with, they call it CRAN, Cloud RAN, okay? Technology-wise, already in the 4G, it was available. China Mobile had the whole thing mapped out, but they will never take it to action, okay? Because, again, they basically said, oh, none of the big vendors that have a, brand name is willing to give me this whole thing disaggregated, so I'm not going to deploy it, okay? So it's the open mindset. It's also very important. It's not just the interfaces and the open source. Because you can have all of those. If you don't do it, it will not happen.
I would only close my remarks by saying that whatever open source we are developing, now we need to be tested, whether whatever has been done is right or wrong. And that is why we have offered that we will make the hardware for testing that open source. And we'll come back and report to the community that there needs to be, either we make the improvement in the hardware, but somewhere if we are lacking in the software, we'll report back to the community. So we will not only do the software part, the open stack which we are developing with ISC and IIT, we will also develop the hardware. The second thing, using this platform, I would like to tell all my fellow entrepreneurs of this country, you have something, please come to us. We will take this journey together for this country. Thank you.
That's great. So, thank you very much, panel. So, in summary, we are looking at open source, enabling collaboration, curation, security by default, lowering of barrier, and creating a robust startup ecosystem, pushing India to a leadership position in innovation and product-centric focused approach, And yeah, so it's a great way to end the session, and but not last but not the least, having an open mindset in adopting open source based solutions. So terrific comments and thoughts. So really appreciate all the the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Open mind with open source. That's a very good comment passed by you. Any questions? We have 5-10 minutes if you want any from the, oh, 2 questions. Can we have the mic? Do introduce yourself and then let me know whom you are asking.
Hello.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, congratulations, Shashidhar, for such a wonderful event. My name is Sanjay Kumar, and I come from a skill development. So, there is a lot of buzzwords around skill development. So, I run a company called as Learnizo Global, which is into skill development. 3 years back, we had only 3 customers. Those customers were like Ericsson, Nokia, and Samsung, all OEMs. So they were the guys who are building the technology. And today, almost everyone is talking about building the technology, be it the government bodies, be it the startups, be it the telcos, the MNOs themselves, right? The hyperscalers are building their own products related to Open RAN. Qualcomm is coming up with Airtel building Open RAN products. So my question is, if everyone is building these products and these solutions, who is going to consume these products, right? Are we making industry unstable because of this? Because government is doing a lot of initiative, operators themselves, Rakuten be it, Jio be it, Airtel, everybody is building their own open-end products. Companies like Starlight, companies like HFCL are building open-end products, government is building open-end products. So who is going to consume all these open-end products? Are we making this is little unsustainable, like how we are going about it? That's my question. My question is open for everyone. Anyone can answer that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, see, any ecosystem, you allow everybody to participate, and then there's the law of survival of the fittest. So finally, who is able to innovate well. The only thing what I'm saying is that the entry, the desire to do something, the entry barriers are not there. Even you have an idea, please come, do it. If you can scale it up, do it well. So survival of the fittest. Finally, as in the morning people were talking about, I think it was Shyam who was talking about the sum of the parts. If you add up all these components together, whether my TCO is going to be lower or higher. Today, I might not say that the TCO will be lower in ORAN, but as the time progresses, I'm sure this ORAN is going to take over in a big way, in a very, very big way. The kind of costs we are looking at, the kind of costs we are experiencing only because of the traditional hardware. The hardwares, hardware you have competition already in COTS. You can compete, you can take from Dell, you can take from HP, IBM. So already one level of competition is ensured. Now rest is everything software, which India is very good at it. So I'm sure that, the other elements, like scalability, reliability, the security, these kind of components will distinguish the, the response time, the synchronization. So many factors actually come in when we test our product in the telco field trial. They have, for example, for a RAN, there are 750 tests. In lab, we do 3 tests, 4 tests, 5 tests people will do. So when you put 750 tests, you see first day you are passing only 100 tests. Then we tell them 650 is missing. So how quickly you are able to close those tests will decide who wins, because everybody doesn't win. Somebody wins, somebody fails. But for the country, somebody will come up.
I think just to add to Dr. Upadhyay, you were asking about who is going to consume these, right? So obviously, the number one consumers are the telco operators globally. We all know that. But a fast-growing segment is the private enterprise. And why is that important? Because 5G is all about services and applications. It's all about near real-time applications. And that consumption is greatest in the enterprise space. We all use data on our devices, but we don't really care if there's a little bit of buffering. Well, we do if it's IPL. But if you go into private enterprises, this is a life or death situation. I mean, there's really critical infrastructure, operational aspects that need to happen, which today rely or primarily on wired or Wi-Fi. And we all understand Wi-Fi is not entirely reliable. It's never built for near real-time applications. So I think the more players that are there in the ecosystem, the more specialization and the more targeted use cases that can be served, right? I mean, this hotel could be lit up with certain services and applications. We could have done a virtual, almost, visual treat for all of us in sitting here and done a lot more collaborative things with that type of ecosystem, right? So these are things that maybe applications are not even born today, but these are things that can be enabled if you have the platform and the infrastructure.
I think we talked about 5G. 5G is not for connectivity. I'll be a bit blunt about it. It's about the industry, which is starting from whether it's healthcare, whether it's the industry 4.0 use cases which can build in oil and gas, mining, manufacturing. Those are the industries which are on their own undergoing digital transformation. Now, as a part of their digital transformation agenda, they are working day and night today looking at how they can improvise on safety, how they can improvise on cost per unit, how they can start looking at the speed of production, how can they can bring automation. I think all these things, 5G, because the characteristic of 5G is not just the speed, but latency as well. I think those kind of things would see multiple applications wherein they would need a private network for themselves, which is beyond today's Wi-Fi connections. And that's something where you need indigenous products. Now, we can have radio, which are different form factor radios today from macro networks. They may not really get straight away into the private network. They may need miniaturized versions of radios. Now, where will that come from? To Mr. Upadhyay's point, those will start coming from the startups in India who will be closer to the need which is really required by the industry. And you'll see those things coming. Because the complexity and the requirement of the industries on the core systems or radio access systems will be very, very unique. It will be different than on top of what fundamentally they have to do. Any base station which has to work in a, let's say, steel plant where the temperature is pretty high, maybe a normal conventional radio may not have ability to be there. So I think it will be, as a part of transformation of India, you will see these changes and you'll see the requirements, multiplying. So that's how the consumption and the behavior of this kind of service will change, and you'll see consumption going up. Thank you.
I'll add on this part that non-telecom users is going to be a significant user of this. And since it will be varied requirements, then the way these products would be developed would also be different. And this strategy to develop these newer, market segment product based on 5G and beyond would decide your ability to survive. If I take an example, in India, digital telephone exchange were being sold by, there were only 10 companies in the world who were making digital switches. They were being sold to India at 10,000 rupees per line. At some point of time, it was decided by government to create CDOT to develop this technology. Those prices sliced down from 10,000 to 7,000 rupees. When the CDOT product came in, prices was sliced down to 5,000. When C dot product came in mass production, then the last bid in which the multinational companies bid against C dot manufacturers, the cost was 2,700, and beyond which they said they cannot compete. So our Indian companies have proven that we have better way of designing these products which is cost effective. So we are going to find our own ways how we are going to meet the products of this emerging market if we leave telecom market completely for some reason. So there is a reason why we should adopt various strategies, and open source is one of that strategy. Possibly it will work. That's all.
Thank you. So with this, we come to the end of the second Open RAN 2022. Our next event in 5G is 7th and 8th September in this same place. It's a 2-day event, 7th and 8th of September. So I would like to thank the fantastic panel and the delegates for joining us today. I request Dr. Upadhyay to present the mementos to the distinguished speakers, sir. First to Rajesh Gangadhar from TSDCI. Thank you for chairing the session, sir. Abhishek Shukla from Red Hat. Sanjay Raina from Mavneer. Mavneer, huh?
That's a nice one.
Gil, you already got it in the morning session, right? Yeah. To Krishna Siroi. Now, if I give you one more, so your baggage will be more weight. So now I'll present on behalf of Bharat exhibition to you. So, ladies and gentlemen, see you the next event, 5G, 7th and 8th September. Good luck. Once again, congratulations to the entire telecom fraternity that Government of India has announced the 5G spectrum.